Hello and welcome to the Scuttlebutt Podcast, the podcast for current and former service members who've got gas, who've got give a shit. If you don't, this probably isn't for you. I'm your host, Brock Briggs, and today I'm speaking with Tim Kirkpatrick. Tim is the co-founder of Condition One Media, as well as the writer and director of the TV show Figure It Out, which follows a recently discharged Marine's re-entry into civilian life. Tim's a former Navy corpsman who did a tour with the Marines. This is important because during his time in Afghanistan, he actually recorded a video of Marines dancing. We see a lot of TikToks of Marines dancing overseas today, but that was far less common at the time. And it was actually this video that got him into New York Film School on his application. We talk about how the military's influenced Tim's approach to film. The thing we all have in common is that we've served and that it's okay for that to come out in the work that you do day to day. In fact, it should. Tim also shares some of the fundamentals of filmmaking, the economics of the business, and what the future holds for the TV series. One of the things I noticed while talking with Tim for the first time is the passion that he has for his work. You'll hear it in his voice throughout this conversation that he's working on the thing that he's been called to do. It's unbelievably aspirational and what we really all should be striving for. Tim's got the gas that I'm talking about. I highly recommend checking out the pilot episode of Figure It Out. It's a fun comedic take on getting out of the service that flies in the face of the conventional talk around service members getting out, and anybody could identify with it. You can find it on condition1media.com. It's not free, it's $2.99, but at half the cost of a cup of coffee for a 30-minute highly produced TV episode that goes towards a great cause, I think it's well worth it. I extremely enjoyed it and have recommended it to several friends already. You'll hear in the conversation, Tim talks about the cost that went into producing this. And obviously, the more people that see this film and the more eyes that get on it, the better for them in the long run. Tim wants to go on to produce an entire series, and the success of this pilot will contribute to that. You can find the link for the pilot in the show notes of this episode. Other than that, you know the drill. If you get something from this episode or enjoy it, send it to somebody. That means a lot to me and goes a really long way. Please enjoy this conversation with Tim Kirkpatrick. We're going to talk about Figure It Out here in just a little bit, but I want to kind of get back to where your interest in film starts. You went to film school after you got out of the Navy, but I'm guessing it probably started a little bit earlier than that if you were willing to go to school for something.
Yeah. So actually, I'm the youngest out of 5 kids. So I got zero attention, as you can imagine, because the littlest kid has no responsibility. No one, it just looked over.
Mm-hmm.
And there was such an age gap between myself and my oldest brother, who is a 10-year gap. So I was always babysitted by the TV. And I was always watching TV and movies just to keep myself quiet, and my parents just had other things going on. So I feel like the movie, The Cable Guy, the Jim Carrey movie, where he just related to all the characters in the movies that he was in and memorized the lines. I quote movies all the time in conversations. And that's kind of extends from the fact that I was always watching movies and TV. So I kind of started film school when I was 3 or 4 or 5 years old,
Mm-hmm.
Ninja Turtles, all the way up to X-Men, all that stuff, growing up. So whenever I watched a show where the underdog would win, I would always I'm the underdog. I'm the guy who always had a flaw in him, or didn't get the hottest girl in high school, or something was always going on with him that he didn't win until the very end. And that's kind of how my path in life has been. But growing up in Kansas, there's no film industry. You either work in the medical field or you work in the aviation with Boeing or Spirit or Learjet, Cessna. So I went medical. My dad is actually a former corpsman who was in Vietnam and Desert Storm. So I followed his pathway. I started working medical in the hospitals, cleaning instruments. I thought that growing up where I grew up, that was it, right? There was no other pathways. And then my brother, my oldest brother, who's a Marine, he was a recruiter for the Marine Corps at the time. So he goes, I wasn't doing anything special. I was like in my early 20s. He goes, why don't you join the Marine Corps? And I'm like, okay, sure. What do you want to do? I'm like, well, I like film and TV. What about doing that? He goes, well, why don't you do combat camera? So I'm like, okay, great, no problem. So I didn't have, I dropped out of high school twice, or actually three times actually in sophomore year. So I did my sophomore year three times. It's just the area I grew up in, it was cooler if you gypped school and did nothing. That was the cool thing to do. So my dad's like, well, why don't you join the Navy and become a corpsman? I'm like, okay. So I went to the Navy office. They were closed that day. So the Army almost got me as a combat camera guy. They were going, oh, we'll guarantee you this, but you may have to do 18 months in the infantry first. And at the time, I'm pretty naive, right? I'm in my mid 20s, early 20s, like 23, 24. But I was just kind of looking for any reason to leave, to get out of my my hometown. So I almost did it. I almost signed up for the Army until literally I went back a couple of weeks later to check in with that recruiter, and the Navy office was open. So basically the Navy, I poached the Navy versus the Army poaching me. Nothing against the Army though. And I walked in and I told them, hey, what about me signing up to become a corpsman and go with the Marines? And they asked me, what's your zip code? And I told my zip code, and then there was another recruiter I had to go to because they broke up my zip code. And about 3 weeks later, I was on my way to MEPS in Kansas City, Missouri to go swear in.
Did you have the chance to exercise like any of that creativity or like interest in like home films or kind of that muscle early on at all?
No, not at all. I lived in a family. We had 4 brothers and 1 sister. My mom was a housewife. She used to be a nun as well, which is a whole other story. But my dad was working 3 jobs when we were kids. So he was a trauma nurse at the hospital for like 40 years. So he had 2 jobs, one at an outpatient center and then his trauma job. But he was also still in the Navy as a reservist. So he was never really around, but he had to spend a lot of time because we didn't really have the resources. Like I got all hand-me-downs. So I would always see like my friends having like these cameras at the time that you had to put on your shoulder and like just be fascinated by that. But I would never get to touch them or, it's because they were just too expensive at the time. And I was one of those guys who broke like literally everything that was given to him. So I didn't really get to touch a whole lot of stuff. I broke everything.
Was your first experience like getting to start putting together films then like in film school?
No, I actually have a video on YouTube. I have a dance video if you go to YouTube and you type in Marines dancing in Afghanistan, I'm on the thumbnail. That's actually my very first video that I directed and edited while I was at my patrol base in Afghanistan. And that's actually the video that I got into film school. So I had an audition to go to film school. And I'm like, I don't have anything. And I realized like, I have this. What does this do? And that actually got me into film school was that dance video. And long story short, we lost one of our bros and everyone was just like super depressed. I shot it there and then edited there. And then when we didn't have electricity, so I had to power my laptop up with a solar panel when it wasn't being used by the other Marines charging up their MP3 devices at the time. So it took me a couple of weeks. And then when I got back to Camp Leatherneck on the way home, I thought I was going to be a celebrity when I put it on YouTube of what we did. So I threw it up on there. And then when I was working at SOI in Camp Pendleton, after I got transferred out of 3-5, I was like, I get an email from New York Film and they're like, hey, we need this information and some videos that you've done. So I'm like, oh crap. So I sent them the dance video and about 3 or 4 days later, I got my acceptance letter and everything like that. I'm like, it worked. Nice. I didn't think anything too much of that video, but they said, oh, this is something we haven't seen before from that perspective, because back then you really couldn't do video on your phone. This is in early 2010, 2012 timeframe. We didn't really have video on your phone as we do now. Look at it, the Cutney film like they had to do back in the day when people were going to film school. It's still digital, but yeah, that's what got me to film school was a dance video. Who would have thought of Marines dancing in Afghanistan? Yeah,
That's literally so crazy. Well,
I know. It's
even more so now you think about like there are famous TikTokers that like post videos and stuff of them in Afghanistan, and that's like, I don't know, like the distribution has changed so much. When I talked to Mark last week, we talked a lot about how media has changed in the last 10, 15, 20 years. And it's
Yes, it
like
has.
that the distance to reaching more people has just like collapsed tremendously.
You don't have to have any connections anymore to create film or distribute film anymore. It used to have to be where you would go and pitch and, oh, yeah, pitch a network or pitch a production company during pilot season. There's none of that anymore. I mean, people still do it, obviously, but you can post your own content and sell it. But I mean, there's several steps along the way. You have to learn and figure out how to do it. But really, streaming services are taking over how we consume content, which is great for guys like me who all we want to do is produce content and let people see it and have people connect to it. That's literally all of our mission is to do is to have people see what we're doing.
People should want to be doing the thing that they can't stop thinking about. And so it's cool to hear like another person that's kind of like, hey, I get to wake up and do the thing that I love every day. And I think that that's should be what we're all searching for, really. Like talking about you working your way through film school, like obviously the Marine dancing video is what got you in. Do you think that like your time in service influenced in like any major way, like the eye that you bring to film today and kind of like that, your inspiration, I guess, if you will?
Yeah, I mean that's basically that's basically my branding. Like the projects that I'm working on, the projects that I've done, they're all basically military based. They may not be in your face military, but the characters in one way or another connected to that aspect. So it's because that's the world that I know. Like I have other projects that we're working on, and they're all true stories that I do. I don't do any fictional. We may bend reality a little bit, but the stories that I tell, they're based on a true story. So that's just who I am. Like I have to know the characters before, and I have to know the story before I could write it. Some people will just start writing a story and find the characters in the story on the page. Not me. I'll add the jokes on the page, but I have to know how to get from A to B before I start writing it. But military is my branding. It's just who I am. It's just, and when you're in that atmosphere, as you know, you're never really not military. Even when you leave, it's always a part of you. I don't care if you did 3 months, 6 months. I don't care about any. That's a part of who you are. And then you can either embrace it or you can use it as an excuse to do nothing. I embrace it.
I think it's very easy to be afraid of like becoming that guy when you get out. That was kind of what my issue was. Like, I was like, I don't want to get out and be that guy, and just kind of tried to downplay it a little bit. And that's kind of ultimately what led to starting this podcast was like, oh, I need to actually lean into this because this
Right.
is something that like actually is a part of who I am. And like, I need to stop like trying to pretend that it's not.
Right. I mean, there's because of my background. I mean, and I don't. There's some criminal things I can write about, but again, I'm not trying to ever depress the audience. I'm only going to try to satisfy them in a way, but I don't want to like completely satisfy them because I want to have a cliffhanger. Obviously that they want to tune into the next time. But when you understand how to tell a story, you can basically start critiquing and molding those characters based on the story, because you have to find that conflict within the story and within that character, or people don't really relate to the story you're trying to tell. And that's actually a very hard lesson to learn. But luckily, as we start aging, we start learning, if you want to learn it, learning how that your story can help somebody else.
I can't even imagine the time and work that it takes to kind of put together a script for a TV show or movie or otherwise, where you're trying to drag the audience through this journey and get them to feel certain things. I would love to hear what your process is and how you think about putting a story like that together and identifying these key points to get your audience through.
That is an amazing question. I watched so many TV show pilots to find out what that little thread was, not the whole sheet, but that little thread of why people give a shit about this character. To get the audience to do that journey, you have to find a way to get them to connect to that character or give them that hardship right off the bat, because everyone has gone through hardships. Everyone. I don't care if you have multi-millions in your bank account or whatever. Everyone's had hardships, right? So I had to find a way to create loss to help people connect to the main character. So the show is about transition. So every character we have to start planting seeds in every character and show the audience how they may be transitioning in the next episode.
It's interesting how you stand back and look at every single movie or story that you consume, and they all kind of follow the same formula, some sort
Absolutely.
of like version of hero's journey where,
Yep.
there's the call to adventure and some type of problem, and you're looking for characteristics that kind of align with the audience and say, oh, I understand what that might be like.
Absolutely. And that's literally what grabs you in to it. Like, I watched, I would watch Silicon Valley, Mike Judge's stuff. I would watch just any comedy that I could. Jane the Virgin had an influence on it. Just all of these shows I watched, like you just said, there's these, you have to look very closely, but they're all kind of flowing the same exact way. I mean, there's a bunch of screenwriting books out there to read. And then the sequences, what happens within each sequence, for a feature, and your 3-act or your 5-act, depending on what you're going for TV, or your 8 sequences for your feature films. But rarely does someone go off that rail for those story screenwriting rules. I watched countless TV pilots to see why is it so successful, why is it so relatable. But a lot of them, they would use the location of each scene as part of the character, which is something I really didn't recognize until I would see it as a trend. So even in my episode, the location is a character. There's goals within those locations. There's obstacles in those locations.
Can you give us the pitch for Figure It Out? Where the idea came from? I know that you've cited that a lot of this stuff is things that you've particularly experienced, but give us the pitch for the pilot, and we'll be sure to include the link in the show notes so people can watch it for themselves.
So the pitch was pretty easy at the time when I started pitching it. So I was like, hey, we follow a young cocky Marine who gets out of the military early. She doesn't know what she wants in life, like most people, and she's just trying to navigate her life and do different transitions through life. And that was literally the pitch. And I've kind of learned through pitching, kind of sometimes the less details you give, the more the person on the other side of the table starts to bring in their ideas to build upon that. So I actually learned that when I was deployed. Whenever we would have an interpreter who would come in on deck to interview one of the Taliban, the bad guys, and the contractor who would interrogate the Taliban guy would give him a little bit of information, and just the way they would do it, he would start filling in the blanks a little bit. So as I learned that, I'm like, let me give them just the baseline and then start with some character. You have your fun-loving older brother, you have the guy, the womanizer, and then you have the hippie who doesn't disrespect anybody. And as I was just doing that, the other side of the table would start filling in blanks. Well, what if we had it like this? Absolutely, yeah, we can definitely do that. But when I would pitch the idea, that would only last for maybe 30 seconds to a minute. And then the dreaded question would come up, well, how do I get my money back? That was the toughest in the beginning, especially in the pandemic. People were very nervous about anything. The pitch was so simplistic because TV, from my learning and the guys I've worked with at We Are the Mighty and other places, when I would hear their pitches from people coming in, they would get way too detailed on it. And the more that you spoke on it, the more the disconnected that the producer would become, because they don't really like the character or whatever. Well, I kind of reverse engineered it and said less, and I got more feedback on saying less.
You pitch storytelling and film production in this way that's kind of bubbling out of the ground, and like you need to kind of be ready to accept and take what's there without kind of suppressing anything. When is the time to be strict with what you're going after? Say you have an idea and you feel really strongly about it. How do you differentiate when to really focus and when to be flexible?
That's a great question. So if a producer comes on and they have an idea, if it affects the story to something that's not inspirational, just because it's cool or it's going to look cinematic or whatever, the story is what drags people in to get emotionally invested. They have to be able to relate to the character and find them interesting. You don't have to have a bunch of resources to create good content. So when ideas get tossed out, they may be too big for the story, and that we don't need that. So if it affects the character and slides them off in a different path, then really the main rebuttal or main objection to that, I'm like, well, it won't work for the story because of this. I know the story so well. I mean, I spent 3 years writing it and then producing and editing it, all that stuff. I know the story very well. So every line of dialogue that's in the show, I can tell you why it's there, for what reason. Everything's there for a reason. A lot of times, as you probably know, people with resources want their voices heard. They want to be heard, and I'll listen. Cool. Sometimes the partnership doesn't work out, which is okay. It happens all the time. But it's to cater to the story, not the producer. It's something that I won't bend on, and sometimes it just doesn't work out. But if we can find a way to organically add in those ideas, as long as the audience doesn't question, would they really do that? Then that's when you know if you have a winner or not. Like if you can predict what's about to happen, that's a failure. If you cannot predict what's going to happen and you don't second guess the motive from the action to the reaction, then you have a winner. But if you can predict that, and that's kind of how I write my each scene. When you're introduced to a scene, the scene cannot end on the same emotional beat as it begins. If it starts out super happy, it cannot end super happy. You know, it just has to, and there has to be a turn within it. So there's a structure to every part of the scene. There's a turn, there's a twist, everything. But once you start learning the character, like I wrote letters when I was in development. I would write in film school when we developed characters. We would write letters and journals in that character's perspective to somebody. And hey, mom, this is so and so, yada yada yada. Would they say that? So you really start learning who the character is before you actually write the script. But in the case of some of the characters in the show, they were split, like TikTok, who is the female character played by Natalie Galvez, great actress. Originally, that was supposed to be a guy playing that role. And we named that guy Playboy because everyone has, as you know, we have nicknames in the military. Everyone in my unit had a nickname, so that's where I got that from. And plus, I'm a huge Tarantino fan and Reservoir Dogs and all this, so people have nicknames in that. So originally, it was supposed to be Playboy, but who cares if a guy gets kicked out and goes homeless for a night? But if it's a female who does it, you're going to feel a little worse for her and want her to win eventually. But does she win is the question. So it kind of extends to if the idea that the quote unquote producer, whoever has the resources, comes in with it, typically if you can discuss with them why it's not a good idea, but you hear them out, they feel satisfied and like, oh, you know us pretty well. I'm like, well, absolutely, this is my thing.
Hearing you talk about like having too much going on in a show. I recently am rewatching Seinfeld from the beginning, and they're going through the part where they like pitch the show about nothing. And they're like do the whole script and everything. And it's just kind of reminding me like how little you need to kind of like put something together, and it can be kind of drowned very quickly.
Well, TV is the structure to a TV show is completely different than a feature film. Even if you have the resources to do a trilogy which unfortunately happens all the time, which I can't stand. But TV has nothing to do with really the plot. Like when the runner on the show, so there's A plot, B plot, C plot, and runner for structure of a TV show. Typically, the pilot episodes don't go off of that because you're just introducing the world to the audience, and then the way in to the audience. Like when we hit episode 2 soon, we start writing all that stuff out. We're going to start developing the other characters more because we have our way in already to the show. But it's funny because you don't really need to have a strong plot. You have to have a strong story, but not a strong plot, which is different. People get that confused, but difference between story and plot. The story is about people transitioning in life. That's the story. The plot is how they do it, that going through the narrative. Seinfeld is a great example of that because it's a show about nothing, but it actually is a show about something. They're all navigating through life in New York. It's almost like Friends. There's a certain aspect to it. It just takes forever to get there because they have so much time to develop the characters over those seasons versus a feature film when you have 90 to 120 minutes to go, and one person can character arc if you're lucky. Some writers don't even do that. But in TV, typically you want all your main characters to character arc within that season and in the series arc as well. But we were just over here a couple of weeks ago, and we have a board up. We actually have all the postcards over there of the whole seasons mapped out now of what each character does for the episodes. We actually wrote the ending of the season before we started working on 2, 3, 4, all the way up to the final episode of the season, because it cannot end the way it started. Obviously, there has to be an arc. So we know that arc already. Now we have to map how to get to that arc, which is literally the funnest thing in the world. So it's quite exciting to get people on board left and right once they watch it, because we get emails all the time from people who critique the show and send us their ideas. And of course, we get scare tactics as well. People from, veterans will reach out who don't like it, but they could like it if we did this. I'm like, hey, thanks for your feedback. I appreciate it.
Go make your own show.
Yeah, well, that's actually what you just brought up is excellent, because most people will never do what we're doing. And it's not because they can't, it's because they don't think that they can. And they absolutely can. It takes a lot of time, but you can absolutely do what we're doing. It just takes a lot of time to map out how you want to do it. It's that trifecta. It's good, cheap, and time, right? Do you want it fast? Do you want it right now? How much money do you have to do all that stuff? But people will reach out, and then of course we'll get ghost stories, and we'll get like dream stories emailed to us. Hey, if I come on board, I can get you this X, Y, and Z. We're good, but thank you so much for watching. Thanks for the feedback. But a lot of people they'll give us scare tactics to come on board, and I'm like, we're really not interested. But we don't say that. But every so often there's a good idea that we get emailed over, but we will never use it because we're not going to pay them for that idea. We will never use an idea from someone that we're not paying. It's just not going to happen.
There's certainly no shortage of people looking to throw rocks at people for doing their own thing because they can't. It's kind of a bummer, and part of something that I've talked about quite extensively on this show before in the past is how being in the military kind of feels like you have a weight on you creatively, and it's hard to do, like, start a business and do things like this. I'm not sure what that is or why it is, but it's tough.
Well, I think a lot of it's jealousy, to be honest with you. Like whenever I see someone doing something great, of course, I'm not a hater. Hey, that's awesome, bro. That's like, or man, that's great that you're doing that. And in my mind, I'm like, damn it, why didn't I think of that? A little bit of that aspect comes into play. When people reach out, we're not like saying no to anybody, but it's just the way they reach out. I don't know if it's just their desperation. I don't know. I don't even know. To be honest, I can't really pinpoint what it is. But some people are very gracious on the emails, and others are just like, oh man, I what you did with this character is so off. Okay, well, thanks for your feedback. I appreciate it. And then they'll end with like, Well, I can share this with my friends, who are in the industry, and like, hey, thanks for your support. Please, by all means, share. But we aren't, and it's just one of those things. And we never expected any of that to happen, to be honest with you. We're just three friends who want to make content, and the show doesn't need a big budget. It's just a simple story. I mean, we're never going to blow up the White House like an Independence Day or do any of that stuff. That's not what the show is about. It's like Curb Your Enthusiasm type of thing. You know what I'm saying? It can be done virtually anywhere. Can be filmed anywhere on really anything, but it's just amazing to me on the incredible feedback we get. And then those 2 or 3% people who just, because they don't relate to it, because that's not the experience that they had in the military.
Mm-hmm.
They had it like we were saying in the pre, when we were chatting, I had it pretty tough. And it's not because it's something that I did. It's just the situations I was put in, being in Afghanistan, seeing certain things, being a part of certain things. Like I know for a fact that some people aren't treated the way they should be treated. And some people are treated much, much better because of the rank that's on their collar or their sleeve. So they have a different experience in it. The producers, we were all enlisted. We were all infantry guys. So we got the best experience you can possibly imagine for our future, not for the experience during the moment, but when you take a step back and you see, oh, I did this, holy crap. Like I was in the Battle of Sangin in 2010, 2011, right? At the time, you're like, crap, man, this sucks. Like this absolutely sucks, right? Bombs are going off, IEDs are everywhere. You're getting shot at by snipers left and right. This sucks. But now that I look back on that, I'm so privileged and honored to do what I did when I was deployed. And now I'm taking those experiences and I'm using them as a narrative for my cathartic measure, right? Because that's what it's really about. It's my transition out. Because when I got out of the military in 2012 and I went to film school, my biggest mistake was I would try to correct people that I had no business in correcting. Like me and my wife would be out to dinner or we would go out to the mall or like that. And I would see someone, or I would be in film school and I would see another student messing up or doing something. And I would try to correct them just because that's what I would do when I was in charge of sick hall, or I was the supervisor in the military. That was part of my transition, which I had no right to do certain things, but I did them anyway. So it took a long time for me to realize like, hey man, I'm a civilian again. I don't have any reason to tell this person what to do anymore. And that's part of some of the things that we're going to look at down the line in the season. But everything that takes place in the episode actually happened.
You've talked a couple times about the difficulty of resource constraints on putting a film together of sorts. Can you maybe walk through what the economics of putting something together like this is? What are the costs you might encounter? And maybe if you can provide numbers for figure it out, that might give some interesting context.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was in development, I knew that we were in the mid, and we're still in the pandemic. Pandemic's not going to go anywhere, but we were in this part where we heard no's constantly. So we were even pitching different companies to hide their logo in the show, and I mean the permits alone, we shot in 4.5 days, and the permits alone cost $1,000. So when you take a look at these little nickels and dimes of all these costs that add up, right? As a producer, and this is why I learned in film school when I was producing my short films, you may think it may cost one thing, but you better double it, because every vendor out there in the very, very beginning, they're going to give you the lowest number to, throw that piece of cheese at you. So like just the permits alone was $800. And then the insurance to go on there was like $6,500 for workman's comp. And then all these aggregate and sub waivers and all this stuff that got thrown out. The insurance came out to about like $7,200 just for the insurance for a 12-day short-term shoot. So we ended up just the 4.5 days alone was over 60 grand just to do that. The actors were the ones who got paid the least because they actually benefit the most from all of this. But nobody, and I don't expect them to do this, mean, no one hooked us up for the crew. No one hooked us up with like, hey, I'll give you halftime. None of that stuff. It was full price for everyone. But what everyone would do, and I knew this was going to happen, when they would send over, their quote sheets for their costs, it was always the lowest number possible that they could generate. And then they would tack on their kit fees and all this other stuff and just start building up. But I knew it was going to happen. Luckily, we didn't go over budget. But I mean, even when we screened at Warner Brothers, there was always these hidden costs that, of course, no one was ever told to us, because the screen at Warner Brothers was brand new to us. The filming aspect was not. I did this in film school, commercials, music videos. That's the easy part, right? But just to screen at Warner Brothers for the premiere, there were so many hidden costs that we didn't know until we got the quote sheet about a week before we actually signed it and had it. I mean, we don't have staff at Condition One. We don't have that, but the insurance to screen there, and just things of that nature. It was just things that we didn't expect to happen, but ultimately it was a great learning. I mean, I learn this stuff every single day. There's no learning that stops ever. But like it was $14,000 to screen at Warner Brothers for the premiere, and we got hooked. That was a hookup price because we were only there for 2.5 hours, and it was a 4-hour block that we blocked it off for. But if we paid for the trash liners was a fee. Ice was a fee.
Oh man, they're really getting you for everything.
And we don't know that information until the quote sheet comes up after we okay, because we were looking at DGA or the DGA theater. We were looking at other theaters to screen at. Ultimately, we decided on Warner Brothers, also because the nostalgia of it, right? And the people who showed up to Warner Brothers wasn't going to be the same type of people that are going to show up to like AMC if we or Regal Cinemas if we screen there, right? It was going to be people wouldn't have come to a theater that they can go to on a weekend with their husbands or girlfriends or whatever you want to call it. But going to Warner Brothers provides a different demographic to getting people to show up. But ultimately, we had a packed house during the screening. We blocked off a couple of rows in the very front to give some space, just because of COVID purposes. But ultimately, that was probably the biggest curveball, because I've never produced a screening before on my own. So that was, but after a while, my partners, they started learning the business aspect to it. So now I'm backed up off the business aspect of it. Now I'm back on creative, and they're doing all the business side of it now. And that's one of the things I'm very excited about, because the whole goal of what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring on the right people, put them in the right spots for building a team up, right? Because a season is very, very expensive. Most production companies, when they have a TV show out, they have a pilot out, you'll never see it, right? You'll never see it. But we decided, let's have people see it. Screw it, because we're selling the show, but we're also selling the episode of the pilot, which no one really does that. So that's why we're also every day, the business model is changing because of all the sales that we're getting on Amazon and on the website for the first episode. But most of the feedback is, hey, when does episode 2 come out? I'm like, hey, we're working on it. We didn't expect any of this. So we weren't really prepared for any of this to actually happen, which is a blessing in disguise. But we're super, super excited. But this is the biggest thing I've ever been a part of. Biggest thing.
That's got to be such a good feeling. And like I said earlier about like so excited to be getting the positive feedback and reaffirmation while you're working on something that you really love. That's cool.
We've actually had a couple of big actors reach out via their managers and agents who reached out to us, which we actually, for the most part, we have connections to their managers and agents already. We just didn't know it because, over a year, you start your social media up, right? People request you as a friend or they follow you and you don't know what they do. There's just a friend of a friend of a friend who think you're doing some cool shit. And then because of social media and military.com, when they posted that stuff, all of a sudden now we're getting more introductions to people. And we've had a couple of emails from these actors, managers who, hey, we saw your show. This is pretty cool. Of course, they won't reach out and waste their time unless they're interested in one way or another. Again, this was just supposed to be a web series that we were doing because we were bored. Like we were going to film all, or we're going to record all the sound on a hockey stick and a Zoom. And that was supposed to play one of the roles just to make it cheaper. But then when the resources started coming in, we're like, dude, I cannot play this role anymore. I'm not good enough. I'm not. So that's the reason why we had to start doing the auditions, which We Are the Mighty hooked us up big time using their office in LA to do the auditions. Shout out to Mark Harper and Augie and all those guys over there. Just opened their doors up for me. And like, because I used to work for them, I was an intern for them while I was in film school. And they actually hired me on full time the week I graduated film school. I actually couldn't even go to my graduation because I was working, which is a great problem to have. I was going to go to my graduation anyway because I didn't want to mess up the hair that I had at the time. I'm kind of receding now. Yeah, they helped out big time, and just the audition process was so much fun to do. And
can you maybe give us a ballpark about like what it costs to put together a pilot like this? Like all in costs, you don't have to give specific numbers, but give me a ballpark and then maybe contrast that with the economics of like what you make when you go to sell like either online or going with the streaming provider like Amazon or Netflix.
The cost to do everything for the show, and it's still growing because of the marketing that we're doing behind it. We're over 60 grand, which is nothing for a TV pilot, which is absolutely nickels and pennies compared to like your real TV shows that are out there. They're on like, on NBC and CBS, right? It's just, but when it comes to Amazon, so as you know, on the website, you can buy the episode for $2.99, which is super cheap. And we get good conversions that way. On Amazon, it's a higher conversion rate on Amazon because you don't have to whip out your credit card. It's right there. You just hit buy, yada, yada, yada. But Amazon takes a huge cut of everything. But we're not really out there to make money off of the episode. We're out there to show people that we can tell a story, to bring on partnerships and sponsorships and stuff like that to showcase what we can do. Now, Amazon, their analytics on their dashboard, they don't update until 30 days after the month is posted. So and the show went live on Amazon in August. So we won't know August because it went like mid-August. Because it was a 3-week process from getting approved as a licensee on Amazon. So it took a little bit. It was an interview process. There was a tax audit to making sure that we were a legit company, a whole bunch of stuff. And then when you submit your packaging, it may not get approved for licensing. Luckily, it did. I knew it was. I did my research, but they take 40% of all your revenue from there. So we're not even remotely close to making back what we've produced, but that's not what we're after. I don't care about making a single dime off this. I want to produce more episodes, but we won't know those true values until probably probably about a week or so. We'll know what August's numbers are, because you can go on there now and it says it's an estimate and it shows you the number of time streamed and sales on it, but it says it's an estimate. And as I refresh the screen every day, even August's numbers are going up. Even though it says one number, when I refresh a couple of days later, the numbers go up because they don't update as often as you would like them to, because you start seeing your numbers increase, it really motivates you, right? Such an optimistic, like, wow, this is doing great. We're doing very well, but we still have a long ways to go if we want to produce this thing independently just from those sales, because Amazon does not sponsor the show at all. So it's up to us to create the market. So part of the business model is to sell the show and then get like a reverse equity on it to continue working on it and using other assets. Because I was always told in film school, never use your own money. That was pre-pandemic though. But since I had the ability to reach out to people with these resources, of course, since I haven't sold any projects before, that halted a lot of the resources that I could have gotten because I don't have a track record of it just yet. and I'll get there. I'll get there. I'm not there yet, but I'll get there. But the fact that I have a distribution platform set up really increases the value, and it legitimizes what we're doing, because Amazon did not have to license the show, but they did, but which was a tedious process.
I think one of the hardest things about pursuing what you love and like chasing after your dream is like really not knowing when it's right to maybe pivot or go a different direction. And so you're constantly looking for these steps of validation. For you, you know, you're like seeing sales come in, there's a certain amount of validation that comes with that. Maybe earlier on in your journey, were there points that you saw where you're like, oh, this is a good sign to keep pressing forward?
Absolutely. So I had some really strong instructors in film school, because when I was doing my MFA in screenwriting at New York Film, I kind of created a bond with some of my instructors out. And I got one of my instructors actually introduced me to his brother, who's a huge TV director. And I sent him the script, and he, of course, they're trying to hold on to your feelings a little bit. You know, they have your feelings in mind when you write something, and they're like, hey, but these guys don't do that. Hey, this was funny, but this has to get corrected. This is not, you know, yada, yada, yada. So that constructive criticism. Now, when you see them adding the amount of notes to your script, they could just say, no, I don't like this, change this. But when they're adding their ideas to it, you know you have something, because they become emotionally invested in your script, because they have other shit to do. These guys are DGA and WGA and PGA, you know, they're union filmmakers. But when they take time out of their schedule and they're adding notes to your script, you're like, oh, wait, you know what? They actually care enough to take their time out to do this. Maybe I do have something there. So that was kind of the boost I needed a little bit. Because again, it was just supposed to be a web series for like, we were supposed to film the whole thing for like $500. Easy day, in and out, nobody gets hurt. I was looking at new iPhones to shoot it on, all that stuff. But we ended up doing two cameras because the budget came in for that. But that validation started coming in when I was probably like on the 20th round of edits on the script, because we were going to shoot it more vlog style, like on the camera with the main characters holding her phone up and talking, but that was too generic. So I started changing it up. But once I started getting those first couple rounds of feedback back, they weren't talking about story. They were talking about plot. So I was like, oh, so the story works for these guys, because no one said that. The feedback was never about, oh, your story doesn't make any sense. And that's the green light in my brain. Oh, shit. Okay. The story makes sense to them, but it's just the plot. I need to work on some stuff, some beats and moving it around. But the biggest thing I did was, for 4 months, I put the script away. I locked it up. I didn't even, it was on my computer, of course, but I never opened it back up. A couple months later, I opened it up, and I'm seeing all the flaws in it, because I become objective to my own story. Boom, worked it out, locked it back up, come back. So it was almost a 2-year process before we even started doing auditions for it. And then when the actors, everyone showed up. All the actors showed up when they got their sides, which of course we pulled the best scenes that we could. At least we thought that they were the best scenes for the actors to come in to read. We had 0 no-shows. So you're like, huh, that's interesting. And we have union actresses and actors coming in to read these parts who have agents and all that, and they're coming in. No one no-showed. I'm like, huh, interesting. But yeah, it was just one of those things where, I mean, we had a bunch of losses, things that didn't work out. You'll never know that when you watch it. You'll never know what our losses were. You only see our wins. But we had so many small wins. It just contributed to a bigger win. It just, things started to land. Locations fell through 24 hours before we're supposed to film. It was just one of those crazy journeys that I'm so glad I had the opportunity to be a part of. And again, me and my 2 best friends did it together. So it was just a way for us to bond even more. So it was pretty awesome.
I think that story really like presses home the importance of like we were talking about, going after and trying to do something that you love. And it's always interesting. You can tell that and quantify that in another person when they talk about the failures. And it's like, it didn't even matter. that those were happening. And there were so many of them. Like you always look back and you're just like, yeah, we went through a lot, but like the thing that we were striving for was so much more important than
All filmmaking
all of
ever
it.
is problem solving. That's all it is. It's problem solving within the story. Would this character really do this? Do you believe that? And then when you're actually filming it, there's problems that pop up all the time when you're working with the RE lighting vendors. What lighting do you need? It's just there's just so many, there's millions of little things that you have to take into account before you make what we think is a simple decision, but literally it's tons of hours goes into making one small decision. But it's so much bigger than just a small decision. Even though, do you want a 5K light or do you want to rent a 2K? It's just that crazy when you think about it. Like, I don't know what, like, so we had again all this problem solving. Do we want to get this angle with this lens and all this other stuff? And I'm like, hey, that's his job. Go figure it out. Literally, figure it out is like a staple in my vocabulary now, because we're still trying to figure out the next step of what we're doing. So in transition in your life, you, Mr. Brock, you're still learning. You're trying to figure out your next steps and what you're going to do. You figured out that you wanted to create this content that you're doing now because you figured it out. You didn't know how to do this probably 3 years ago. You didn't even know you wanted to do this 3 years ago.
That's pretty close to right.
I
Gotta
didn't know I
figure it
wanted to do
out.
this. I didn't know I wanted to do this until I was in a fighting hole in Afghanistan when I hand wrote a TV show, another TV show in a fighting hole. I was handwriting it on a waterproof piece of paper in the rain because I was just bored. We were doing movie trivia back and forth, and I just started writing away. I mean, you don't know what you want to do until you figure it out. So literally the concept of the show came after the title. I knew the title of the show before I did the characters because I'm still trying to figure it out.
And I think if there's one resounding lesson there, it's like it's okay to be in that stage. What do you think has been your biggest lesson and takeaway throughout this whole experience?
Man, this is a great question. I have to always remind myself I can't control everything. That kind of was the reason why when I got out of the military, I would like try to correct people because I'm trying to control things. When all these past couple of years, I have taken a step back and trying to be not being that person. I cannot control everything. Things are going to happen if they're going to happen. Things will happen if you work hard enough to your goal. It'll happen organically. You just don't know when. So that's the hardest lesson I've ever had to learn was if it's meant to be, it's going to happen when it's supposed to happen. When the show first launched on the website, I was constantly logging into the website to see how many sales we were getting. Refresh, refresh, refresh. And of course, they weren't flooding in as much as I wanted them to in the very, like literally the first couple of hours, because I'm like, oh, I must be terrible at this. But when I stepped away from it and I would log back in, boom, sale, 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 sale. Just because I stopped looking. I'll get emails with opportunities when I'm not paying attention to them. The opportunities do not come in when I keep hitting refresh. I cannot control everything. Literally, I don't control anything, to be honest with you, because the team is getting so big and diverse and so strong and solid. I don't have to control everything anymore. I'm actually beyond that because my partners are now they've done their research on what they have to do to make people out, because the first sales we got were just from friends and family, right? Because that's within your social media network. Now we're seeing sales come in, people we don't know, because we're in Europe, we're in 44 countries. We figured it out, but we're not trying to over control anything because we can't control what we can't control. So once I learned that, and I probably learned that within the last couple of weeks, to be honest with you, and now I feel I'm so much happier. I was in a little bit of a depression for a little bit because I thought once this went live, it would just go viral because it was my baby. It didn't, but it's doing well enough to where there's so much opportunity that's posting up for us as long as I stop trying to check everything every second. So my biggest lesson is, Tim, stop trying to control everything. Stop. And I'm not. It'll happen if it's gonna happen.
One of my all-time favorite quotes, I'm not even sure who it's from, is impatience with action, patient with results. And it's funny how things kind of like veer away and don't really mean as much when you just kind of focus on getting the work done.
I mean, luckily, the work that I do for my daily, it's so tedious every day because I work in the SEO space in digital marketing. So I'm constantly auditing websites. That's I film and I write music videos, and I maybe get to do that maybe 5-6 times a year, which is not very much. And most of the time I do it for fun because I love the art of media and doing this. But my work is so tedious. When I get slammed because I get all these. I have 412 accounts that I work on their websites and stuff like that. But when I forget about the show, 3 hours later, I look at my phone. Hey, you have a message from so and so Productions. Oh shit! It's because I wasn't paying attention. I wasn't looking at it. But you have to surround yourself with good people who care about you. I watched a lot of reels on Instagram, and I watched this one guy who said, if people don't light up if people don't light up when they see you, they're probably not the right people to be around. So I took that. So Brian and Daniel, who are my partners, when we first see each other, it can be the next day or a month later. Whatever they're doing, they stop and they rotate towards, and that's how you know you have a girl. They stop whatever they're doing to go. It's very, very rare that your friends will actually stop what they're doing to give you a big hug when you walk over. My civilian friends don't do that. My veteran friends, all the time.
Tim, this has been a very, very fun conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like I said,
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Hope I didn't ramble on too much.
No. It's incredibly inspiring to see somebody like pursuing their craft, and I think I said this before, but very aspirational. But Tim, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, bro. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for tuning in today. Your listenership helps me better educate people like you and the rest of our nation's military, both past and present, on building a successful life outside of military service. If you're looking for more ways the top vets are leading more effective lifestyles, building businesses, and using the resources designed specifically for you, press here for a selection of some of the best clips. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date, and I will be talking with you soon.